good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this session, which is obviously very, very difficult given the very bad news. But feedback from everybody who sort of joined early was that they'd like to continue, and so we'll do the presentation on the understanding that people may wish to just not show up, be with their families, and do whatever is you need to do where you are. So my name's Duncan Baldwin, and it's a real privilege to welcome so many of you. I know many of you are here now, and we know hundreds of people have signed up to join in this session. So these days I work for the very lovely Endeavour Learning Trust up here in Lancashire, but having sort of entered the twilight zone of phased retirement, I'm also just doing that part-time and work as a consultant on the other days. I'm joined by my colleague David, who will be doing the lion's share of the presentation, and David is a executive head down in Surrey, a group of secondary schools there, and so it's a great pleasure for both of us, and very humbling that so many of you wanted to show up. If you want to get me on Twitter, then that's my Twitter handle there. David eschews all forms of social media, so you won't be able to get him on Twitter directly, but I'd welcome any sort of connection that you might want to do there. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And as for you, so we're going down the list of people who've signed up. We've got sort of everybody under the sun. We've got in the sort of the school system, so we've got CEOs and executive heads, head teachers, heads of school, many members of the leadership team of various titles, many members of the sort of the data community as well, who are managing data within their school or across the trust, and so on. And I noticed one particular delegate who I remember when he was 11, and when I was a deputy head, and he's now the deputy head as well. So that's very nice, and I think that's probably pretty good confirmation that it is definitely time for me to retire. But I'm going to ask a question. It's still sir to you, young man. All right. As you know, the session's being recorded. We'll send all of that out later. And what we thought we would do is, this may not work, is to sort of unmute everybody at the end to see if anybody wanted to sort of actually talk to each other, or to David or myself, or indeed to colleagues from CSRA and SMID who have also joined the session. And I should say a huge thanks to colleagues from CSRA and SMID, first of all, for making this event possible through their generosity, and have made it available. That means we can make it available to you free of charge, but also for reasons, as you'll see later, that both, although other providers are available, both CSRA and SMID have played a special role, I think I would say, in what we're going to talk to you about, and why we can actually share some of the data with you this evening, why we're actually in a position to be able to do that at all. And so why do we need this webinar? Well, looking at that list of names and people who've signed up for this session, I know many of you, I can only describe you as data recidivists, I suppose. You're people who've joined, been to conferences and so on, where David and I have shared a platform over the years, and you will know that over many years, as more and more people sort of join the leadership teams and start engaging with data, that there are sort of a number of lessons that need to be learned, and a number of ways that data can be seriously misused, and that's persistent, surprising, and potentially dangerous. So on the slide in front of you, we've got an example of just such a thing. So this was sent out to schools from a local authority just last week. and it commits the sort of cardinal sin of data lack of understanding, if you like. So it's asking schools for attainment 8 and so on, and then, what's your progress 8 score? But I suppose what they meant to say was provisional based on 2019, but I don't know. They don't seem to have had the good grace even to update this form to say that. I suppose at least it didn't say 2020 or 2021. But, the progress 8 score based against 2016 or 29 is not a score. It doesn't mean anything. And, sort of submitting that sort of stuff is it's dangerous, and it's misleading potentially, and it's encouraging people to do bad things, really. And this sort of lack of understanding of data goes all the way up to the top. So when I left our school a little while ago, the civil servants that I'd worked with and harassed for many years gave me a parting gift. The reason it's a bit crinkly actually is because it's a tote bag, which is actually sort of on the wall behind me, and it's a quote from Hansard when Michael Gove was appearing before the Education Select Committee all the way back in 2012. This was, of course, when education secretaries were in post for more than 2 weeks, it's if you sort of read through that, I think it was Graham Stewart in those days, wasn't it? Who was nobody's fool, really. If good requires everybody to be above the national average, and then everybody needs to be good, how is that possible? By getting better all the time, said Michael Gove in his own inimitable style. So it is possible for everybody to be above average, is it? It's possible to get better all the time. So that's we can sort of have a wry smile at that. But it's actually sort of disguising actually that there's an interface between politics and good use of statistics and data, and those poor old civil servants are at the interface of that. They've got a code, of course, where they aren't allowed to diss their minister, if you like, or indeed reveal conversations. But I guess this code doesn't extend to getting tote bags created, which poke fun at particular instance in the life of the Secretary of State. I don't suppose they made this one specially for me, but it's certainly got pride of place on behind me. And unless we sort of get smug and and so, well, of course we could never do anything like that. Somebody again sent me a comment from a head on Facebook about exam performance in 2012, where they'd committed the same, cardinal sin of advertising their progress 8 even before the collaboration data came out. So goodness knows where that has come from. If they've used 2019, they could be in serious trouble, because that progress 8 score is going to be wrong. And the sort of common data risks and mistakes I've sort of tried to categorize here a little bit. The first one, I suppose, is about, well, the first one's about averages. And, what's interesting about this one is I've committed exactly this error looking at the data that's come through in my trust without even thinking about it. I looked at a class set of average grades for a particular subject. They were lower than I thought they should be, and I was sort of headed off down one line of inquiry without actually thinking about how the grades are spread out. And there were some U's in that class, which is another line of inquiry, but it would have affected the average grade. So I am as guilty and at risk of making these types of mistakes as anybody else, Michael Gove or the local authority or any of us, really. So the second type of error is using an incorrect comparator, using last year's average for progress 8, or trying to compare different subjects as well. And these two errors, which we will sort of unpack a little bit as we go through, I've sort of recently come to reading a book I should have read many years ago. I don't know, my camera's still on, I'll hold it up there. I don't know if you can see that, but I absolutely recommend this book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics back in 2002. And it's a book basically about how we make judgments and what types of thinking go on. And Kahneman distinguishes between type 1 thinking, which is instant, without requiring very much effort, and uses heuristics really. So when a problem is quite difficult, our minds sort of go off and solve a different problem that we think may be the same problem. And the consequence of that is that we often get the wrong answer. And he distinguishes that type of thinking, type 1 thinking, from type 2 thinking, which is painful and effortful and requires learning, requires understanding, and we sort of have to force ourselves into thinking in that sort of way. So I really recommend, after you've, when you can, if you remember, if you haven't read that book, do have a look at that, and you'll find, particularly if you're a maths teacher by trade, you'll recognise type 1 thinking from your year 10s probably. David and I have, as I say, shared a platform, and I think I've probably earned my stripes now, because David's let me use what's become sort of a very well-known trademark of his when he's been trying to explain or give some examples, some illustrations of what we're talking about here. So I've just said that averages, without distributions, if you like, are risky. So in order to try and explain what we mean here, if you haven't seen this example before, good, but many of you have. Anyway, you're on mute, so you can't give it away, can you? So this is an average, and what is this an average of, is the question. So it's a sort of brown, murky rectangle. And this partly explains, I think, why we've put the what we have on the title slide and on the Eventbrite page for this. So that brown rectangle is the average of the Mona Lisa. So if you do the average of every little pixel there, you get that brown rectangle. And the process of averaging means that so much detail is lost. So, this is where I reveal my complete lack of understanding of all things artistic, really. But, the sort of inherent beauty of the Mona Lisa, the enigma, if you like, all of that is sort of crushed out to turn all of that into one sort of blobby brown mess. And the danger here is, as I've just described, I did with this particular class, particular group, which had some news in it. The danger is that you can miss when things are wrong, and this is wrong. Okay, there's clearly something wrong here, but it's got the same average as the Mona Lisa the right way up. And so, that could be, your high attainers doing particularly well and your low attainers doing particularly poorly, but averaging out to be sort of okay, if you like. And if you just used to using averages, then you would miss that sort of nuance, that sort of detail. So as I say, it's a bit of an honour really to be allowed to use David's very good illustration. But we're not saying averages are bad or not useful, because here's another painting, and you can probably guess what that is now. Then this is, of course, the average of a different painting. But the point being really that if you've, and you will have done this, I'm sure, over the last couple of weeks as you've been analysing the data, if you focus just on the average, there is a real problem potentially emerging, because you may miss important information. So with any average, really, you should be looking at some way of looking at the spread, the distribution, and how everything is sort of spread out around the average. And we'll have more to say about that at the end of this presentation, because we want to give you a call to action about how we can help everybody do that better. So I suppose, if you like, what we're trying to do, what we've tried to do for many years, and indeed we're trying to do this evening, is to help everybody learn along that sort of type 1 thinking to type 2 thinking journey. This is sort of best summed up in a wonderful way by by Clifford Stoll's quote here. Clifford Stoll, famous astronomer, and did some work on internet forensics, I think. Data is not information, information is not knowledge, knowledge is not understanding, and understanding is not wisdom. And it's a real privilege to work with David, who has certainly done a huge amount to improve where I am on that continuum. To turn data into information, we need meaning, really. Then we need instruction to turn information into knowledge, explanation to turn knowledge into understanding, and we really need some values, knowing what to value and what is not valuable, to end up with wisdom at the far end. So I thought it would be useful to sort of try and summarise then, as we start thinking about 2022 specifically, why 2022 is quite different. Well, we know the circumstances, obviously, why exams haven't taken place and how they've come to take place. But what exactly are we talking about here? So the first thing, the first very important thing to say is that the standard, as the awarding community call it, and Ofqual, the exams regulator, this sort of notion of sort of overall attainment across the piece, has come down from where it reached by virtue of the CAG and TAG process, down to where it was in 2019, but it's headed towards that, but it hasn't landed back exactly where it was. And I've seen several websites celebrating just how good results were in school, which are understandable. You worried about your year 11s, you worried about whether they would cope, their resilience. You worried about whether they'll get the grades and so on to get through to their destinations and all of that. And absolutely right. And clearly you want to celebrate all of those things. But, well, we've got cameras off here, but I could ask the question to you. So how many of you had the best exam results you've ever had? And, if cameras were on here, you're all going to be putting your hands up, aren't you? Pretty much all of you, I dare say. And that's by design. That's not by, you'll be you know what I mean. The regulator took a decision that the standard would be, relaxed to some extent compared to 29. But the regulator never said that it would be halfway between 2020 and 2019, and never said that it would be the same for each subject as well. So we'll be very, very cautious, saying things like these are our best results ever. And if you have put that on your website, it might be true, but I would just sort of ask you, when you have a minute, they always, it's funny, they always say we have the best results ever. Good, quite right. But let me finish this bit by saying, well, what are you going to put next year then? Because it's also the case that the standard will continue to go back to 2019 levels, and you'll all have results, I dare say, certainly on average, lower than they are this year. Those of us who sort of thrive on the whole data stuff, really were waiting in 2020 for the first time for scaled scores to be mapped to exams, and obviously that didn't happen. So this is the first time that Key Stage 2 scaled scores, sort of newish format, if you like, actually been connected through to exam results. But they don't sort of correspond, and David will go into some detail in this in a bit, to, for example, we've got low, middle and high prior attainment. We've been used to doing that for some time, but the percentages, if you like, don't correspond. The percentages of low, middle and high are not what they used to be when we were using levels 3 and 4. So, you know, that's different as well. And that's sort of coming through for the first time as we've got exam results. We've got partial publication of performance measures. So no Key Stage 2 publication, you know, in the national press, for example. Everything's going to end up in, you know, ASP and IDSR, but Key Stage 2 results won't be published, whereas Key Stage 4 results will be, which is, you know, a grave error. I think there's no, that's the, you know, I would say it's the wrong decision. But the reasons that, you know, that's happening, you know, there's something about, you know, the Key Stage 2 tests weren't, you know, adjusted and no mitigations or whatever. Well, if you hear that, you know, you need to be cynical about that. I suspect it's rather more to do with the risk of a boycott and history repeating itself. That, you know, there may have been a boycott of Key Stage 2 results in a way that a boycott of GCSEs would not have been possible. So, you know, one develops a bit of cynicism over time, and this is, I suspect, what the deeper reason is. But with all credit to the DfE, they are doing some good things about that. So they renamed the website so it doesn't talk about comparison anymore. There'll be heavy caveating about, you know, the difficulty and the differential impact of COVID on different schools, different parts of the country. And I'm pleased to say they're removing those dreadful coloured bands, and, you know, one hopes that that will stick after this year, and they'll perhaps forget to put that back. No progress measures using CAGs or tags for obvious reasons. This applies to sixth form students, your A-level students, and no level 3. This year, no progress measure, and the English and Maths retake number, if you regard that as a progress measure, it's arguable whether it is really, but that won't be, you know, the percentages converting up to a grade 4 won't be published either, and again won't be published next year for the same reasons. Then they've had to sort of adjust the rules for Progress 8. So, you know, some schools did early entry, 2020 and 21. Those grades won't count, but the entries do, and there are some rules accommodating that as well. And the other thing really is about the whole issue of FSM, free school meals. So even before COVID, we knew that the impact of universal credit was having sort of a differential effect around the country because of the way it was rolled out. And the sort of the students who fell into that category were becoming a different demographic, really, actually, but doing it in different places in different ways. And of course, since COVID, of course, then that whole demographic has changed again, because of course, you know, parents may have lost jobs, and, you know, children become, you know, sort of later on entitled to free school meals. So very, very difficult really to make any comparison between anything, actually. So, you know, what can we conclude is probably why you're here. So let me just talk for a little while about why it is we can actually be fairly confident about what we're saying this evening, and it's to do with the very significant role of our colleagues at CISRA and SMID, and the fact that we have looked at the data. They've been sort of gracious enough to work with David particularly, and myself, and we can be confident about it. So let me sort of go through a little bit of recent history about why we are confident about that. So Progress 8 as a value-added measure landed, didn't it, for the very first time in 2015 when schools could opt in, I think. I remember correctly, 2016 was the first full year. And then a number of other changes happened, didn't they, to you know, we went to the 1 to 9 in phases and so on, which meant that Progress 8, in a nutshell, they sort of revalued the grade C from 5 points to 4 points, which meant overall that Progress 8 was, and Attainment 8 was all over the place. So trying to make any sense of that was quite difficult. I already explained to you that it's very, very bad idea to go public or even out of your own office, any sort of notion of Progress 8 before it's published. But even if you realise that that's not a good thing to do, the fact that you have to wait so many weeks until you get, your Progress 8 score is infuriating. The Chair of Governors says to you, well, how well have we done? And the only honest answer you can give is, I don't know. We've got to wait until the results are in. Now that's a difficult situation to be in, because it makes you look like you're sort of underskilled or something. And it's also, if you think about schools that are inspected, admittedly a different framework in those days, but nothing is sort of known, if you like, data-wise, about how well the school has performed at that sort of critical interval between, start of term and when provisional Progress 8 is published. So I was concerned about that for all those levels, and the fact is that the DFE does not have the data to do anything with for several weeks. If you think about it, the data goes from rewarding organisations sort of around the houses through Ofqual a bit as well, but they don't have all the data that you have sitting on your management systems about the pupils and their contexts and all that. And the DFE ultimately end up sort of drawing all that together in the national pupil data set, but it takes some time. But actually schools have got collectively the complete version of the truth. If you think about it, they've got all the results, they've got all the prior attainment, they've got all of the contextual information. If we could sort of galvanise schools and get them to share and collaborate with the data, then we could do it. We could work out Progress 8 reasonably accurately, or so I thought. That was the plan. The trouble is, it's quite difficult getting everybody to share the data. So I thought the next best thing would be to work with, ask a provider if we could do that. So I popped over down the road to see the very good people at CISRA explain this sort of predicament, and they graciously listened to what I was suggesting to them, with a sort of finger hovering over the emergency button to get me evicted. But to their credit, they heard me out, and they did a lot of work looking at whether this was possible, looking at the previous year to see that it was possible, and so on. So I want to sort of publicly big up the role that CISRA played here, and Dom, who's I think in the session, hope he is. Hats off to you, because you did an enormous amount of work to make this happen. So first graph of the evening, but by no means the last. So the blue line there is the average of the Attainment 8 scores across sort of old money Key Stage 2 levels in 2016, and 2017 was when there was this sort of devaluation that I've just spoken about, with 4 points instead of 5, and so on. And so the net effect was the average went down. Heads were sort of suicidal at this point, because they thought their Progress 8 score was going to be terrible, because they were doing the wrong thing. They were using last year's averages, which and sort of counterintuitively, when the average goes down, if you do that, your scores go up. So this was the time when we did that work, and when CISRA gathered the information. And this was the result. So that was the 27 line, and the light blue line there. There are two lines there, I promise you. The light blue line, which you can sort of just see in places poking out, is the sort of CISRA estimate, and the blue line is the final averages published by the DFE. And it sort of well, when I see that, I actually remember the sensation when the provisional results came out. I was sort of hiding under the duvet about whether this experiment would have worked. But actually, seeing that now again, I think is a really it's a really significant event. And so we'd sort of cracked that delay, if you like. And I remember a civil servant saying to me at the time, so, are you telling me, Duncan, then that you can get the answer out in 3 days? to a very high level of accuracy when it takes, the Department for Education 6 or 7 weeks or whatever it is, and even then we get it wrong. Yes, actually, is what I'm saying, and well, there we are. And of course, this came of age, if you can remember, in 2019, when the DfE did indeed get it wrong. If you recall, they left out, I think it was several BTEC results, so the open bucket is all wrong, and I think ironically, they mishandled GCSE statistics and did that wrong as well. The point is, the collaboration exercises as they had already, sussed out. And it's not Schadenfreude, really, when they make a mistake. Absolutely not. Anybody can make a mistake. But given that, the sector is doing all these things and doing it so well, really, I wonder if the DfE this year will be tempted to sort of have a quick look at the averages that the sector has provided and check their own homework, as it were. I don't know. I hope they do. So the role of CISA has been really significant, and as I say, hats off to them. Now, the next sort of collaboration event is to do with Progress 8 scores and so on are all very well, but what do you do if your Progress 8 score is not very good? Well, as the leaders in your schools, you need to do something about it. You need to understand what has gone wrong. And you can't really tell that from Progress 8. You can get a bit of information about maths and to a slightly lesser extent about English. But when it comes to the EBAC subject, for example, they're all mixed up together in the EBAC bucket. And if you know anything about the awarding of those subjects, you will know that, say, modern languages and history the grading is different. David will touch on that, I think. So it's really, really important as a school leader to actually know how well subjects have done. And in order to do that, what you need to know really is, for saying, maths, for example, you need to know how well your maths students have done by comparing them, if you like, to an equivalent group of within the nation, the national profile of maths GCSE students. In other words, you need to compare like with like. You need to make correct comparisons. Now, David, of the many examples of David's brilliance, sort of created a method which was not focusing on averages and gave you a picture based on sort of the cumulative grade distributions in each subject, using a publication from the DfE, the transition matrices at subject level, and combining those with the data checking file that comes out later on this term. And for many years, David made that available as a spreadsheet. The problem with it is that the DfE traditionally have not produced the transition matrices until quite late. And we've spoken about that to them several times, really. And it's to do with their timescales. They're focused on performance tables, which is their job. Transition matrices don't really help them; they help the profession. But that means they're sort of lower down the DfE's priorities, if you like. Whereas, knowing what those transition matrices are and linking them in this way through David's very clever idea, means that you can then make meaningful comparisons about subjects, individual subjects, accommodating this difference in awarding that I've spoken about there. So SMID, again, to their amazing credit, made David's toolkit available online and made that available free. And then facilitated a collaboration exercise, again, where you could take your data checking file, sort of upload it and basically recreate the transition matrices, which was an amazing piece of engineering. So this is what I'm talking about. This is some output from that, from sort of David's transition matrix toolkit. This is for English literature. You've got 2 lines there. You've got a red line, which is your school line, which shows, how many grades, at least a 9, at least an 8, at least a 6, at least a 3, and so on. And basically the nation is then sort of scaled down to be the same size, same prior attainment distribution as your school. and the blue line is what the nation would achieve. And you can see the line wobbles about a bit, and your red line is cumulatively above. For 3 and higher, there's a bit of a dip at 5 and higher, and so on. And so you can move away from the average and get a sort of a slightly a richer picture, if you like, a more Mona Lisa-like picture of what's going on. So more to say about that later on, because we want to do that again, and we need your help to do it. So if you're watching now, or you're watching the video, we'd really, really like you to take part in that collaboration again. So where I'm led to, really, by all of this, is that, having sort of seen it firsthand at helicopter view for so many years, I believe firmly that collaboration between schools, schools do collaborate in all sorts of ways, but collaborating using their data is not just the antidote to competition, as I put it there, but potentially a really powerful way forward to help improve outcomes, raise standards, and get to the heart of what you really want to do as school leaders. So that's I'm sort of nail my colours to the mast on that one. That's pretty much all I wanted to say, and David's going to take over and get into the details of the 2022 data in a moment. Now, in what is already a very sad evening, I didn't want this occasion to pass without just taking this opportunity to pay tribute to I think the other formidable expert in performance data that I've come across in my working life. So Mike Treadaway sadly passed away last December, and Mike worked with David and I, and was many of you, if you've been to conferences, that would have heard both Mike and David speak and recall his enormous and infectious enthusiasm talking about same things that we've been talking about this evening. But when Progress 8 came out, Mike and I, and Mike had an incredibly a wicked sense of humour about all of this as well. Mike and I did some seminars when Progress 8 came out, which would have been 2015, I suppose, would it? Leading up to the decision whether you opted in or not, 2014, 2015. We did loads of short seminars about all of that. And we were walking past this pool table on the way to the exhibition room, and quick as a flash, Mike said, I've got it. All we need to do to explain Progress 8 is to say it's just like pool. It's about getting the right balls in the right pockets. And that's stuck with me forever. And we walked past the same pool table a while later, and I thought this is the table where that came. Mike would, had he been with us, would have been as keen as we are to look at the national data. And Mike was an enormous champion of disadvantaged students, pupil premium students. He was very, he investigated and hypothesized about how we should do things differently. So, for example, ever 6 he thought was wrong. It should be ever, for those students who were in families that sort of just escaped the level of benefits but never really got out of poverty. And was an enormous champion about of data being used fairly, accurately, and to uncover things that we needed to know. So my fondest memories of my own professional development are the sort of working with Mike and David together. And frankly, on those occasions when we were sort of both all at conferences the night before, it was trying to keep up with the intellectual demands of the conversation was always a challenge. But Mike is sadly missed, and a great contributor to the sorts of things that we want to share with you. Although I don't think a great pool, I don't think he's going to hit that yellow, do you actually? So better at the contextual value added than potting the yellow. We miss you greatly, Mike.